Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, SIAS, for inviting me to talk about this topic. Does board diversity enhance performance? Studies have been done to answer this question. A few years ago, our own Professor Lawrence Loh did a research study of listed companies in Singapore, and he showed that having board gender diversity measured by the number of women directors on the board positively impacted corporate governance scores, and that governance was strongly correlated with corporate results. Another study by Prof. Loh this year found that not just diversity, but also education and age at the board and senior management level positively impacted ROA. Further academic work and stringent conditionality would be needed to establish direct causality between gender diversity or any particular form of diversity and corporate performance. And as far as I know, Prof. Loh hasn't done that yet, but you can ask him later yourself because he'll be participating in the panel. Now, you tell me frankly, if I could show you some regression studies and high percentages for various types of diversity and return on capital, would that be enough to convince you? Would you be rushing off to press the board chair and nominating committee for a more diverse board? As a shareholder, what would you do? Are you convinced already? Or are you not quite? Well, instead of relying on studies to show what board diversity can do, it may be interesting to turn the question around and instead ask, why wouldn't diversity enhance performance? Like all good studies, let's talk about what performance is first. Let's agree. Performance means results or outcomes, and the performance can be both immediate, earnings which translate into dividend, and longer term, the capacity for the business to grow and develop into a stream of earnings in the future is measured by enterprise value. Now, why wouldn't board diversity enhance performance? Without board diversity, what would you gain? There must be something. Without dissenting voices, it's easier to get to a decision and faster too, since it cuts out unnecessary examination of many alternatives when everybody knows that, in fact, there are only one or two or maybe three likely alternatives. So we'll get efficiency, shorter board meetings, faster lead time to decision. What do you give up? Some degree of thoroughness, perhaps. The comfort of having examined many alternatives and made sure you did a thorough job. The rigor of having cast the net widely and examined the less obvious along with the most probable. Is this what is best for the company? Is it sufficient? We should answer that in the context of the role of the board. For this, let me quote you Dr. Ben Broadbent, Deputy Governor Monetary Policy at the Bank of England. He puts it very well. He says, it's crucial to have a range of views when making important policy decisions. That's why we have committees to begin with. If diversity of thought was irrelevant, then we would leave all these decisions to one person. All the evidence says this is a bad idea. You are more likely to get the right decision through deliberation and discussion among a range of people, each with different strengths and perspectives. Companies are constituted with boards of directors, the objective of which must be to derive their collective wisdom for those important decisions they make. The most important far-reaching decisions are made by the board, not just the chairman and not management either. Sell one business, buy a different business, committing capital and leveraging the company for investment. Fire the CEO, employ a CEO, bring the previous one back, fend off a takeover, answer to the regulator, satisfy shareholders. We shareholders all want returns. Returns come from taking risk. Companies take risk as they operate through business cycles directed by the board. So don't you agree with Dr. Broadbent that boards should reflect the wisdom of a group? Even if the board chair takes a leading role, the group is there to add to the discussions. So we've established the important far-reaching decisions boards make. And many things come into consideration: customers and markets, complementary products, competition, technology, staff, supply chain, regulation, society. Put another way, varied interests need to be considered in boards' decision making. Without a good mix of experience, skill sets, background, way of thinking, can boards be confident of their decisions? Looking forward and deciding in dynamic situations is much more challenging than hindsight. We investors understand this. Sustainability, or ESG, and climate change have added new areas to what boards need to be conversant with. Almost as a separate movement, social issues directly confront companies these days. And investors and other stakeholders now want to know how companies are managing environmental and social issues. And that's not unreasonable because ESG issues have financial effects, which will affect performance in the present as well as in the future. Do you realize it's only just been about 5 years of serious ESG and TCFD reporting? We've moved so fast, and now concepts like net zero GHG emissions are targets set by companies and governments. Regulation around the world will take us further, and carbon tax is here to stay. Transition to a low carbon economy has the potential to sift companies between leaders and laggards. Directors who are able to navigate these areas add to quality as much as to the diversity of boards. Technology and advances in technology have accelerated the pace of change in every industry. In the search for climate solutions, technology is looked at for the answers, and its added impetus to the pace of information. Let me give you an example. Not so long ago in maritime transportation, I was impressed our port was embarking on LNG bunkering, an advance in GHG emissions over the typical heavy fuel oil. Now people are talking about hydrogen and ammonia-based fuels, and these can be zero carbon. These are altogether new alternatives, and they'll mark a big advance in the greening of the planet. The implications will be felt not just in the maritime industry, but also in adjacent industries, in shipbuilding, and through the supply chain. So my point is that the increased uncertainty and march of innovation on many fronts makes it critical that those who are responsible in leadership of companies keep watch on those many fronts and are alert to developments that could be game changers for business. A clear call for board breadth and diversity. Now, it may be you're a small cap specialist investor and you think the companies you invest in won't be affected or not so fast. There'll be lots of time before hydrogen technology finds its way to me. Well, may I just bring back the reality of the global market and supply chains? Somewhere, possibly a little further down the value chain, the Singapore company gets into the global trade flow, and it'll have to be ESG conversant. Maybe it wants to tap a different segment of customers or not be dropped by existing customers. Whichever it is, it's coming to a company near you. Recognizing business as part of the wider social and environmental framework leads to a need for engagement with stakeholders to bring their views and responses into the boardroom. Communities and companies are being drawn closer together directly and not just going through the government. One of the most obvious stakeholder groups companies have to engage is their staff, who are not just workforce of the company, but also members of the local community. Some European jurisdictions have an established tradition of employee representatives on supervisory boards by law. Germany, the Netherlands, and some Scandinavian countries. In 2018, the UK Corporate Governance Code was revised to require listed company boards to adopt one or more of three mechanisms for their board's active engagement with employees. Number one was have a director appointed from the workforce. Number two, have a formal workforce advisory panel. Number three, a designated non-executive director representing workforce views. I don't know how many companies have done one, but about half have done three. Nevertheless, it's instructive that workforce views are important enough to compulsorily enter into board decision making. And it's not just the views for staff that would become under HR. It's the views of staff on the decisions of the board. So a strong vote for diversity on the board. Another trend in stakeholder voices reported by Spencer Stewart, the executive search and consulting firm, is an interest among technology companies to add the customer's voice to the board. Directors who have the customer's perspective, how they view and use the product or service, would pinpoint opportunities. It seems as though some companies are drawing a leaf out of the private equity playbook. PE partners may compose boards of investee companies with retired customers or with those whose roles in another industry can be ported over to the one in question. And hearing how companies are creatively searching for ways to best equip their boards reinforces the conviction that boards have to make it their business to look broadly at risks and opportunities on the horizon and be able to understand the implications of stakeholders' wants. Considering social issues of the day, modern slavery, forced labor, fair and living wage, gender parity, minority representation, and others, is not philanthropy. It's prudent business self-interest. Investors in recent years have become more vocal, expressing views to the companies, voting at AGMs, stating their wishes publicly. They deserve attention when the issue is value creation of the company. The regulator has also called for increased transparency on board diversity. SGX RegCo revised listing rules in 2021 to require board diversity disclosure, including having boards consider their composition as a whole to serve the needs and plans of the company. Large institutional investors have taken action on board composition, and let me give you some examples. First one, 3 of ExxonMobil's board directors were voted off the board in 2021. The directors who came on board instead were from a downstream energy company, renewable diesel and jet fuel, and a technology entrepreneur with experience in energy infrastructure. You can see the direction. The directors replaced ex-CEOs of Caterpillar, IBM, and Petronas. Example 2. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, BNP Paribas Asset Management, AXA Investment Management have all voted against company resolutions as a result of inadequate board gender diversity. And number 3, BlackRock's 2022 proxy voting guidelines for Asia explains the rationale for its expectations on board diversity for Asian companies. In our experience, they say, greater diversity in the boardroom contributes to more robust discussions and more innovative and resilient decisions. Over time, greater diversity in the boardroom can also promote greater diversity and resilience in the leadership team and the workforce more broadly. That diversity can enable companies to develop businesses that more closely reflect and resonate with the customers and communities they serve. Gender is not the only aspect of board diversity, and it may not even be the most important, but it is widely tracked around the world. And it's obvious, it's easy to monitor, a clear aspect of diversity, and probably a reflection as well of how the board thinks. One glance at a board photograph will tell you the gender diversity. No need to comb the CVs. Maybe that's why annual reports these days show directors with individual photographs. It's harder to tell. In Singapore, discussions on board diversity have mostly been about gender as a clear and obvious starting point. And there's also a sufficient supply of directors if you include foreigners, especially bringing more diversity to the table. But the picture has always been about the needs of the business and the needs of the company. Diversity to fulfill responsibilities in keeping with the times, industry, and situation. Among top 100 listed companies in Singapore, the number of all-male boards has gone from 50% in 2013 to 13% in June 2022. This movement just proves the point. Board diversity is good for the company and for performance. Thank you.